Teacher wouldn't listen, so the entire class complied, and he got fired. This happened in the early 2000s in my junior year of high school. The district had just built the third high school in our city, and most of the teachers were new. The band director was one of those new hires. He was qualified for the job, but had zero people skills and was extremely abrasive towards students. He had previously taught university and could not wrap his head around the fact that high school students are not college-level music majors who live in practice rooms and write symphonies in their sleep. His normal behavior consisted of berating students for not knowing university-level curriculum, talking down to everyone about how he can't understand why they were so incompetent, and stopping rehearsals to go on long tangents about things that had nothing to do with music. Every day, at least 2 to 3 students would leave class in tears. We complained to the higher-ups, and they repeatedly brushed us off. He made students hate attending his music classes, and many dropped band and orchestra as a result. One of the classes he taught was supposed to be Intro to Music Theory. For those who don't know music, this would be a class that should typically teach things like different types of chords, the definition of music symbols, the logic behind key changes, etc. At the first class of the year, there were about 25 kids enrolled. Most of these were music and drama kids who wanted to be teachers or performers in the arts one day. On the first day, he handed us a quiz because he wanted to see how much we knew. I think there were maybe 3 to 5 kids who were able to attempt a single question on the quiz. No one got a single answer right. That's how advanced it was. Imagine signing up for what you think is a basic pre-algebra class and walking into advanced calculus. This teacher spent the entire class period berating us for not being prepared when no one could even attempt his quiz. We told him, "This is an intro class. None of us have learned anything like this before," and his response was, "Really? I thought this was an advanced class." The next class period, there were maybe 15 kids enrolled. He did the same thing. Ask us to perform something we can't even understand, and then berated us for not being prepared. At every class, he would say, "I thought you all were musicians. This is supposed to be an advanced class." By the end of the second week, there were 6 students left enrolled in this class, including myself. He softened up slightly to those of us who stayed, and seemed to think we were his prize students and that this was his class of elites. Think Professor Slughorn from Harry Potter. In truth, we all thought he was insane and cruel, but the 6 of us had sufficient music background and experience to understand a fraction of his lessons. Without the bell curve, we all would have failed his class. A few months go by, and we are at the end of the first semester. By now, every student connected to music in the school hated this guy, and repeated complaints had done nothing to fix the problem. The admins filed away every complaint, but never did anything more than remind him that he's supposed to be more kind to students. He changes nothing and still berates students and makes them cry. So when it comes to the final exam for his theory class, he decides that he wants to give it to us early, so that on the day the final is supposed to be scheduled, we can have a class party instead. Of the 6 of us left, 4 of us have the same period after his class together as well. That class was AP English, and we were prepping for the AP test. We had no problem with a class party in music right before the AP prep exam, so we didn't complain. The day comes of our music final exam, and after we finish the test, he tells us that for our class party, he wants to take us all to breakfast at a new IHOP that opened 20 minutes away. His class was first period. We try to tell him all the issues with this plan. We aren't allowed to leave campus without permission slips. It was a closed campus policy due to an incident where a student who left campus for lunch got hit by a car and was killed. We will not get back in time for second period, which is a final exam. He doesn't have permission to remove us from the campus. What if there is an emergency and we are unaccounted for because we aren't even at the school? His solution was to tell us that after the start of class on our final class day, he would be going to IHOP, and if we wanted to join him, that was our choice, but if we didn't, we would have to stay in the classroom and not bring attention to the next that there was no class and no teacher. Without talking about it to each other, the 6 of us saw an opportunity to finally get the admin's attention to the complete disregard this teacher had for rules and policies. We made sure to inform our English teacher that we might be late to class on the day of the final, due to a class field trip for music theory. She was irritated and reminded us that this final was very important and that she would not give us extra time if we came in late. We told her that we understood and gave her details about where we would be and what we would be doing and who we would be with. She said she still expected us to be in her class. On the day of the final, we all went to IHOP. It took forever to get there because of construction and forever to get our food because the restaurant was newly opened and had a large number of customers. We got back to the school halfway through our second period class. The admins were waiting for us. Security was waiting for us. My English teacher had called the front office to complain that 4 of her best students were missing and that she was fairly certain we weren't even on campus. The admins had checked attendance, and seen that we were all marked present that morning, and they had searched the entire school looking for our class. The four of us walked into our English final to a livid teacher. We knew she was pissed at us, but couldn't punish us beyond saying we had the same remaining time as the rest of the class, since we had been with a teacher in our absence. None of us did as well in the final as we could have if we had the full 87 minutes. But we were doing well enough in the class already that the lesser marks didn't affect our overall grade too much. The band teacher had a private reprimand that was so loud the entire school could hear it. He was confused as to why the administration was upset that he took minor children off campus without permission or notice, without proper school transportation, or even a good reason. He stayed with his usual attitude, but this time towards the admits. Why are you guys so incompetent about this? They're old enough to drive. What's the problem? The English teacher, who I actually adore, and was one of the best teachers I've ever had, absolutely went mama bear on the administration about how they could continue to employ someone who disrespects the other teachers so much as to deprive his students of their final exams and put them in potentially dangerous circumstances. He told us to drive ourselves to the restaurant, and any accidents or medical issues would have been the school's fault. He was fired later that day. Many of the students had a gleeful but confused reaction, since the six of us weren't talking to anyone about it. All most people knew was that this tyrant of a teacher was gone. We didn't spread the story very much of how it happened, because we still feared being reprimanded for our involvement, since he technically had us a choice to go with him or stay, but I always smiled when people gossiped about what the final straw was that got him fired. Boss tried to make me work after hours without clocking in. Regretted it the next day? This story is a bit of a long one and goes back to when I worked at a casino. For anyone out there that thinks it would be a great job, well, I can tell you right now, it's not as glamorous as it seems, especially when you were working in the kitchen. Now, a little backstory so you all can get the whole picture. When I started working at this location, I was young, still in college, and working 2 part-time jobs. At first, it was just okay. I had been hired on as a steward, which is just a fancy term for dishwasher, which wasn't too bad as it had been the same job I had at the last restaurant I had worked at. However, there were a few differences. I won't go into too much detail and name all of them, just the ones that are important to this story. The first one, and the one I liked the best, was that since there were so many restaurants and the stewards were all in one department, we were shuffled around every day. One day you would be working in the steakhouse, the next the buffet, then the Italian, the sandwich shop in the bingo hall, and so on. This meant that you were always working with other people, interacting with them, and giving a change of scenery. I was told I was odd for liking this, but my counter was that if you did end up working with someone you didn't get along with, then it would only be a while till you worked with them again. The second was that this place hated unions. Twice a year, there would be a meeting that everyone had to attend where they would make these long presentations on how evil and manipulative unions were. Also, there would be signs all along the employee hallways with anti-union propaganda. After working for the casino for some time, my boss approached me asking if I wanted to be bumped from part-time to full-time. I said yes, as the benefits were really good. Not only did I get medical and dental insurance, but I would also be getting access to their lawyers as well as a few other things. I guess it was a good thing that I did, because a few months later there were some major shakeups. I didn't know what caused it, but most everyone there hated the new changes. For one thing, the sick note policy was canceled. Meaning, if you were sick, it wouldn't matter if you had a note from your doctor saying that you couldn't work. If you didn't show up, they docked you a point. This resulted in cooks and stewards coming in, vomiting on the floor and in the trash cans because they couldn't afford to lose a point, as it would count against them when it came time for raises. Another thing they changed was that they were cutting the number of full-time employees. I was safe, along with everyone else who had that status, but if any of us left, that slot would not be filled. There would only be 2 full-time employees per department. Speaking of departments, that leads me to the next big change. Technically, the stewarding department would be disbanded. This meant that while our supervisors would still be there, it would be the chefs and managers of the restaurants that would be in charge of us. This also meant that we would no longer be moving around. I was sent to the steakhouse and, thankfully, I had 2 great female coworkers. In fact, we were so good that we were called AAA, as all of our names began with the letter A. As we worked there, I began to plan moving up within the casino. I knew it would be difficult, but I had a dream of buying my family's cabin from my parents and living up in the country while I finished college. Sadly, on my first attempt to becoming a supervisor failed, and I ended up training the person who did get the job. I didn't complain, I just took it as a sign that I needed to up my game. Now here our story really begins. See, our head chef was being transferred to the Italian restaurant, and the assistant chef was taking his place. Meaning we were going to hire a new guy to take his place. Let's call the new guy Kevin. When Kevin first came in, he seemed okay. Not great or awful. He was just there, and we had no real reason to talk most days as we were usually pretty busy. Then, maybe a month after Kevin started working there, I had my first real interaction with him, and it was something. It was at night with the dinner rush just starting to pick up, and I told my co-workers that I was going to fill up my water bottle before it happened. They said okay, and that they would begin doing the same once I got back. But before I could leave the steakhouse to go to the break room, Kevin called out to me. Kevin, Opie, where are you going? Me, just getting a drink before we get busy. I told the girls. Kevin, then why aren't you using the waitstaff drink fountain? Me, blinking and confused, we were told when we started that staff are only supposed to get drinks from the break room. Kevin, don't give me that. I see the waitstaff getting drinks there all the time. You were just going there to waste time. I'm going to have to write you up for this. Me, wasting time? The break room is just down the hall. In the time we've spent having this conversation, I could have gone down there, filled my bottle with ice, gotten my drink, and gotten back here. Kevin then opened his mouth. But before he could say anything, the head chef caught sight of us, standing there, and came over to see what was going on. Before I could open my mouth, Kevin spoke up, explaining the whole thing with a superior look on his face. That, however, faded when the chef spoke. Chef, Kevin, Opie is right. Employees are only supposed to use the drink fountains in the break room. So I'm going to have to talk to the waitress supervisor about this. Opie, go get your drink. I need to talk to Kevin in private. So I did. After that, I was pretty much confused by what just happened. At first, I was willing to give Kevin the benefit of the doubt, believing that he honestly didn't know about that rule. That maybe chefs and supervisors were allowed to use the waitstaff station, assuming that it applied to everyone. However, when I brought this up to my co-workers, they said similar things happened with them. That he had pulled them over for a minor infraction of the rules, and when they just said they were sorry, he let them off with a warning. So they suggested that he was just marking his territory and would have gone easier on me if I hadn't questioned his authority. It was after that, however, that I began to notice things. Firstly, the waitstaff was no longer talking with Kevin as they were pissed off at him for getting the crackdowns at their station. It was during this time that I began to realize just how often he hung out with them. He was also always calling over my co-workers, asking them to help him with a job like peeling potatoes for hours, leaving me alone. What's more, whenever I stopped to speak with one of my supervisors, who happened to be a young woman, he would yell at me to get back to work. Slowly, I began to suspect that he had other intentions. These suspicions were later confirmed during that summer. For those of you who have never been in a professional kitchen, it can get hot. And in the summer, it can get really hot, and the odors can sometimes overpower you. On this day, I was working at one of our massive sinks, scrapping off the remains of perch and giving the pans a deep clean when Kevin called me to the office. Now this was odd, as I had only ever been called to the office to get my 10-cent raises while getting a performance evaluation, and neither of those were to happen until January. Curious, I followed him to the small room, where he gestured me to enter first. I did, finding a woman I had never met before sitting at one of the desks there. When I entered, she looked up from her work to give me a curious look that said, "Hello. Can I help you?" You know the look. Then Kevin spoke as he shut the door, walking in backwards as he did. Kevin, you stink. Opie, sorry, but Kevin told me that you told him that no one had cleaned the dishwasher and that it was a mess. So much that I had to come back and clean it without punching in, or else I would be fired. The color on everyone's faces drained. When the first person managed to compose himself, he told me that none of them had seen Kevin and that the machine was perfectly cleaned when they arrived. Now, hearing this did make me feel bad, as what I was doing would put them behind. But Kevin told me to do this, so I was following it to the letter, while also making sure everyone there knew who sent me. Seeing that I wasn't going to stop, not that it mattered at this point, as the machine had been drained, one of them wanted to get the night supervisor. While he was gone, the other two began to argue with each other over whether or not Kevin could order us to stay past our shifts and fire us if we refused. It didn't help that the casino had this nasty habit of offering employees a room to stay in when the roads were snowed over, only to them make them work all night as they were on call. When the night supervisor came, she asked me what was going on. I repeated my story while cleaning the machine. She said that Kevin had not spoken to her and was gone before, stating that he doesn't have the power to fire me. I just told her that I really couldn't take the chance. Then I asked her how to put in my 2-week notice. That confused her even more, asking why I was doing this if I was just planning on leaving anyways. I told her that I would need time to make arrangements for my future and that getting one last paycheck was important. So, I wrote up my 2-week notice, even mentioning why I was leaving before hitting the road. When I got home, it was 3 a.m., and with all the rage now out of my system, I just crashed onto my bed with my uniform still on. The next morning, I was awoken to the sound of my phone ringing. It was the casino. The head stewarding supervisor was asking if I could come in and talk about last night. At first, I told him no, that I couldn't come in early just to come back home. However, he said it was important. Curious, I told him I would be there in an hour or two. When I arrived, I was taken back to the steakhouse office to find it crammed with people. The night supervisor was still there, the night security officer was there, my supervisors were there, several head chefs were there, and the steakhouse manager was there looking like her face would erupt into flames at any moment as she stared at the one figure who was sitting. It was Kevin, hunched over in his seat, looking like a child who was in timeout. I was then told that they knew what happened. After I had my talk with the night supervisor, she went to security and found footage of Kevin looking out the door before heading towards the locker room and finishing off with him, leaving with a grin minutes before I left the room. After that, she called in Kevin to show up the next morning. He tried to lie his way out of this, stating that it never happened and I was just lying to get him into trouble. The supervisors then said that it was a simple matter to check as they have the security guard that was by the room and that they can check the footage. Instantly, he remembered that he had spoken to me, only I had misheard him and that he would never tell me to work without punching in. The night supervisor and the others in the room then asked, "Why would OP lie? Who told you that the machine needed cleaning? Why would he be the only one who needs permission to leave?" And so on. Over and over Kevin tried to lie only to change his story again and again until finally he realized he had been caught. The steakhouse manager then turned to me before apologizing, asking me if I would consider staying. The head manager also apologized, asking the same. For a moment, I was going to say no, but then I had a stupid idea that if I did this, then I might have a shot at becoming a supervisor myself and not have to leave. So I said sure, but only if Kevin never talks to me again. If he has a problem with what I'm doing, he'll have to run it by the head chief unless it's an emergency. They agreed. Later, I heard a few stories on why they finally acted. The first and least likely in my opinion was that this incident finally caused someone higher in the food chain to notice all the written complaints I had on Kevin and was demanding answers. The second was that they didn't want to lose me just yet. Remember how I said that we used to move around from area to area? Well, turns out there were now only 2 employees who knew how to work in every restaurant, meaning I could go into any area and know instantly where everything goes and how that area operates without wasting anyone's time. But the most likely reason was due to the union. News about what had happened the night before had spread throughout the casino faster than I ever could have imagined, and if they didn't take care of this, there was a greater chance that the union reps would seize on it. In the end, I stayed in the steakhouse longer than Kevin did as he left 2 years later. But before he did, I offered to throw a pizza party for everyone the day after he left.